So imagine a parasite so aggressive, so utterly demanding, that it literally forces the host it's actively killing to pay child support for its offspring.
Yeah, it is an absolutely brutal concept when you really break it down.
Right. And you probably know this parasite as, well, the polite, quaint little sprig of greenery you awkwardly kiss under during the holidays.
Which is a very cozy, safe image.
It is. But today, for you, we are completely shattering that cozy image.
Yeah.
Because when you step out of a festive holiday movie and into the neotropical cloud forests of South America, mistletoe isn't some cute decoration.
No, not at all.
We are looking at massive, brilliantly colored, canopy-dwelling vampires that are actively driving some of the most extreme evolutionary arms races on the entire planet.
It is a phenomenal shift in perspective. And, to call them vampires really isn't an exaggeration. It is their literal biological strategy for survival.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are unpacking the Loranthaceae family, which are commonly known as the showy mistletoes. We've pulled together a really fascinating stack of material for you today, ranging from botanical monographs and deep anatomical studies to bird conservation reports and evolutionary histories.
There's a lot of incredible data in there.
There is. And our mission today, to connect the dots between bizarre plant anatomy, ruthless host-parasite warfare, and extreme bird adaptations. By the end of this conversation, you're going to have a masterclass in just how interconnected and, frankly, how ruthless nature can really be.
And we're going to look at the exact mechanics of how they pull this off. Because the strategies these plants use to dominate the canopy are, well, they're nothing short of structural engineering mixed with grand larceny.
I want to start at the very beginning because the thing that blew my mind immediately is that these plants, these massive bushes living 100 feet up in the canopy, they didn't start out up there.
No, they definitely didn't.
To understand how they rule the treetops, you first have to understand what they used to be.
Right, they absolutely did not start in the canopy. The Loranthaceae family is huge. We are talking over 75 genera and around, I think, 1,000 different species.
Wow, that's massive.
Yeah, it's a massive family. But if you look at the basal condition of the family, meaning the original evolutionary state they evolved from, they were terrestrial root parasites.
So they lived in the dirt like a normal plant, but they were already thieves.
Precisely. A great example of this basal state that actually still exists today is Nutea floribunda, the Western Australian Christmas tree.
Okay.
It grows in the ground, it has normal-looking leaves, but beneath the soil, its roots are armed with these specialized structures that act like tiny parasitic guillotines.
That's horrifying.
It really is. They literally slice into the roots of neighboring grasses and trees to steal water and nutrients. But roughly 40 to 52 million years ago, a massive evolutionary loop occurred.
Okay, let's unpack this because this is the crazy part to me.
The ancestors of our neotropical mistletoes left the ground completely and moved up into the branches of host trees.
I just love this transition. Think about it for a second. You're a squatter living in the dark, damp basement of a high-rise. You're constantly fighting with the other ground plants for, like, a tiny sliver of sunlight.
Right, it's highly competitive down there.
So, you decide you're tired of the basement, you move out, scale the outside of the building, and just build yourself a luxury penthouse right on the roof, completely bathed in sunlight.
That's a great way to look at it.
And while you're at it, you steal the building's plumbing to rent your own private jacuzzi.
That is essentially what happened. But moving into that penthouse didn't just change their view, it forced an entirely new set of physical rules on them.
Because they're not in the soil anymore.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is that when you live in the dirt, you have soil to physically hold you upright, and you have crawling insects everywhere to stumble into your flowers and spread your pollen.
Right.
When you move 100 feet into the air, completely stranded on a dry branch, you have to entirely redesign your physical anatomy and your reproductive strategy.
Which brings us to two sister groups in the Neotropics that our material focuses heavily on Psittacanthus and Aetanthus.
Yeah, those two are fascinating.
They are heavy hitters in the cloud forests, particularly at very high elevations in the Andes. Colombia, for instance, has the highest richness of Aetanthus species in the world. And to survive up there, their anatomy had to get weird.
Extremely weird. You can really see this when you look at their anthers.
Okay, for a quick refresher for you guys listening, the anther is the part of the flower's stamen that actually produces and holds the pollen.
Right, so in most of the flowers you might have in your garden, the anther looks like a little fuzzy pollen-covered oval sitting at the very top of a long, thin stalk.
Right, and between these two sister groups, they took very different architectural approaches to this. The research highlights that Psittacanthus developed these thick, blunt-tipped, versatile anthers.
Yes, they are bulky.
Like much thicker than the stalk they sit on, and they pivot. But Aetanthus went in a completely unique direction.
They did. Etanthus evolved what are called isomorphic needle-like anthers. Instead of looking like a separate little fuzzy oval on top of a stalk, the anther is the exact same diameter as the stalk itself.
That's so strange.
It is. It looks like a direct, completely seamless continuation of the filament, ending in this sharp, prominent, needle-like extension.
Wow.
If you were holding it, it's incredibly difficult to even distinguish where the stalk ends and the pollen-bearing part begins. It is a completely unique feature in the entire family of these plants.
Okay, so they built these highly specialized, structurally bizarre flowers blooming high up in the canopy. And they are massive, right? We are talking about giant, brightly colored tubular flowers, neon reds, bright oranges, vibrant yellows.
Oh yeah, they are incredibly showy.
But because they are stranded way up there, they can't rely on the wind. And ground beetles certainly aren't climbing 100 feet just to visit. They need highly specialized couriers to move that pollen.
They need a dedicated, completely exclusive delivery service. Because these tubular flowers are so long and deep, a standard pollinator, like a bee or even just an average bird, simply cannot reach the nectar well that's hidden all the way at the bottom.
Which introduces perhaps the most absurdly customized bird I have ever read about in my life, the sword-billed hummingbird.
It is an incredible creature.
If you haven't seen a picture of this bird, you need to look it up immediately, because it literally looks like a biological glitch. It is the ultimate lock-and-key match for these deep mistletoe flowers.
It's an absolute marvel of extreme anatomy. The sword-billed hummingbird is the only bird in the world that has a bill longer than its entire body.
Wait, it adds a full 4 inches to the length of a tiny bird.
Yeah, 4 extra inches on a hummingbird is massive.
Imagine you have a face attachment that is longer than your actual torso. It's so comically long that the bird actually has to angle its head upward just to maintain its balance when it's perched on a branch.
Otherwise, it would just tip over forward.
Exactly. And think about daily life. If it gets an itch, it can't use its beak to preen its own feathers like every other bird on Earth. The beak is just too long and unwieldy.
Right.
It literally has to use its tiny feet to scratch itself.
It sounds like a severe disadvantage, right? In many ways, it's a very clumsy piece of hardware to carry around all day. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, that unwieldy beak is a masterstroke of coevolution.
Because it's the only thing that fits.
Exactly. That beak fits perfectly, millimeter for millimeter, into the massive, deep tubular flowers of Aetanthus and Psittacanthus.
It's the ultimate mutualistic win-win. The hummingbird uses what's called a trapline feeding strategy, right?
Yes.
It basically flies a routine daily route through the canopy, hitting up these specific mistletoe patches. The bird gets exclusive access to a rich well of nectar that absolutely no other bird or insect can reach.
It effectively has a monopoly on that food source.
And in exchange, the mistletoe gets a massive, highly motivated, incredibly loyal pollinator that will fly miles to find another mistletoe flower, carrying the pollen right to it.
And the mistletoe has evolved to aggressively maximize this relationship right down to the microscopic level of how it actually releases that pollen. Which brings us back to the anthers, specifically a strange feature found in some of these species, like Psittacanthus schidanus.
Okay.
They have what are called septate anthers.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because I was trying to wrap my head around this. Usually an anther is like a single water balloon filled with pollen. When it opens, it bursts, and all the pollen is right there, available all at once.
Exactly, a single payload.
But a septate anther is divided. Instead of one big sac, it has longitudinal pockets, completely separated by internal walls. When I first read this, my immediate thought were weather protection.
That makes sense.
Like, does it keep the pollen in separate pockets so a heavy rainstorm doesn't wash it all away at once?
That is a really logical guess, considering they live in a cloud forest where it rains constantly. But it actually has nothing to do with the weather.
Oh, really?
No, it's about rationing. It's structured almost exactly like a daily pill organizer.
It's a time-release capsule.
Exactly. Instead of dropping a single massive pollen bomb on the very first hummingbird that visits, the flower is able to dose out its pollen. A pocket opens, pollen is taken. A day later, another pocket opens, more pollen is taken.
That is brilliant.
It really is, because the lifespan of one of these flowers is about 6 days. If it released all its pollen on day 1 to a single hummingbird, All of its genetic hopes are riding on that one bird not getting eaten by a hawk.
Oh, wow, right.
But by dosing it out over 6 days through these septate anthers, it ensures that its pollen is picked up by multiple different hummingbirds flying completely different trapline routes.
Talk about diversifying your portfolio.
Exactly. It maximizes the chances of its genetic material being carried far and wide across a highly fragmented forest.
Okay, so the strategy works. The plant successfully tricked the bird, and the flower has been pollinated. But that is really just step one, because now the plant has a massive new problem.
It needs to make a fruit.
Right. It needs to create a fruit to carry its seed. To build a big, juicy berry, you need serious energy, nutrients, and water. But remember our squatter analogy. This plant does not have roots in the ground.
Not a single one.
It lives 100 feet in the air on dry bark. Where on earth does it get the building materials?
Well, this is where the mistletoe proves it didn't pay rent. It steals. It forces the host tree to foot the entire bill.
Let's look at the fruiting stage of Aetanthus pseudinus. It produces these big berries that transition from green to red to purple and finally to a deep blackish color when they are fully ripe.
Yeah, they change colors to signal to the birds.
And they sit on top of brightly colored cupular pedicels. These are basically little neon cup-like structures holding the dark berry, designed to act like a flashing neon diner sign for fruit-eating birds like cedar waxwings and silky flycatchers.
But producing those big, nutrient-dense, lipid-rich fruits requires a massive amount of metabolic energy. And researchers tracking this actually found something incredible about how these plants manage that energy deficit.
The fruit size data, right?
Yes. They discovered that the size of the mistletoe's fruit is directly dictated by the specific species of tree it is currently parasitizing.
The data on this is wild. They found that mistletoes growing on naturally distributed wild host trees like deciduous sweet gums or evergreen oaks produce significantly larger fruits than the exact same species of mistletoe that had hijacked cultivated trees like guava or hawthorn.
And the reason comes entirely down to the theft. The mistletoe isn't just siphoning a little water. It physically usurps photosynthetic carbon resources from the host tree.
It's just outright stealing its food.
Exactly. It taps into the host's plumbing and actively drains the sugars and carbon the tree worked hard to produce through its own photosynthesis. The healthier, older, and more robust the wild host tree is, the more the mistletoe can aggressively steal and the larger the berry it can produce.
Which brings us back to that dark irony. The victim tree is bleeding its own sugar to pay child support for the parasite's offspring.
It really is.
It is spending its own life energy to fatten up the very seeds that will go on to infect other trees. But let me challenge this for a second. If it steals all that extra energy just to make a larger fruit, I assume that's just to pack more seeds inside, right? Bigger fruit, more babies.
You would absolutely think so. It makes total sense. But no, the seed size itself is virtually the exact same. There is only one seed in there. All of that stolen energy is going entirely into padding the fruit with extra fleshy pulp.
Wait, really? Just to make a bigger snack?
Exactly, because making a bigger snack is a masterclass in territorial expansion. It's all about slowing down the bird's digestion.
Explain the math on that.
Think about the bird's gut retention time. If a cedar waxwing eats a tiny, thin berry, it might process and pass that seed in, say, 15 minutes.
Okay.
In 15 minutes of flying around the canopy, it might only cover a few hundred yards. That means the seed falls relatively close to the parent plant into an already crowded area.
Ah, I see where this is going.
Right. But if that same bird eats a massive, heavy, lipid-rich berry fueled by a giant wild oak tree, it takes much longer for the bird's stomach to break down all that dense pulp. It might take 30 or 40 minutes to digest.
Wow, that's a huge difference.
In that extra time, that bird has flown miles away, across the forest before depositing the seed. By stealing more carbon from the host to make a thicker fruit, the mistletoe is vastly expanding its territorial reach.
Okay, so a silky flycatcher has eaten our giant stolen carbon berry, and it has flown half an hour across the canopy. Now comes the absolute wildest part of the life cycle, the takeover.
The hardest part.
The seed has to survive being digested, exit the bird, and successfully hijack an entirely new, heavily armored tree.
It is a brutal gauntlet. Inside the bird's digestive tract, the outer skin of the fruit is stripped away and the fleshy pulp is digested, but the seed itself survives. And when the bird finally passes the seed, either by defecating or regurgitating it onto a branch, the seed emerges covered in a specialized substance called Viscin.
Now, Viscin is essentially a biological superglue. It is incredibly sticky.
Yeah.
And it has to be. right? Because if the seed just lands on a branch and rolls off, falling 100 feet to the dark forest floor, it's a death sentence.
Absolutely.
The Viscin cements the seed to the bark of the host branch. But wait, if this stuff is basically biological epoxy, how does it pass through a bird without gluing the bird's intestines completely shut?
That is the genius of the mechanism. Viscin doesn't act like glue inside the wet, dark environment of the bird's gut. It requires exposure to oxygen and mechanical friction to activate.
Oh, that's so smart.
When the bird passes it, the seed is rubbed against the rough bark of a branch, stretching the Viscin threads in the open air. That exposure causes it to rapidly dry and harden, locking the seed in place with incredible tensile strength.
Unbelievable. So the seed is glued down, and once it is secured, the seed reveals a major biological anomaly. If you remember high school biology, almost every seed contains two main things: the embryo, which will become the plant, and the endosperm.
The vital food storage.
Right. The endosperm is the starchy energy reserve that feeds the baby plant while it takes its time growing its first roots and leaves. It's the evolutionary packed lunch. Every good parent sends their kid out into the world with a packed lunch.
Exactly. But Aetanthus and Psittacanthus seeds, they have absolutely no endosperm. They abandon the packed lunch entirely.
Which seems insane to me.
Yeah.
You are a plant stranded high up on a dry, unforgiving piece of bark. You have no soil. You have no immediate water. Why would you send your seed out with zero food reserves?
This raises an important question, right? You might be wondering how that could possibly be a survival strategy. But because they don't have an endosperm, these seeds dedicate all of that internal space to massive, what we call polycotyledon embryos.
Polycotyledon.
Yeah. A cotyledon is a seed leaf. Most flowering plants have one or two, carefully folded up. But P. sudanus can have up to 8. It is just a massive, fully formed cluster of green seed leaves, packed in tight and ready to go.
And researchers found that a higher number of cotyledons is directly associated with a much faster germination rate. Without that endosperm, the seed has no long-term supplies. It can't afford to sit there and slowly figure out how to grow. It is a desperate, violent race against time. The very second that seed is glued to the branch, the clock is ticking before it dries out and dies in the sun. It has to act immediately.
It is an aggressive biomechanical invasion. As soon as it germinates, the hypocotyl, the stem of the tiny seedling, bends and grows directly toward the bark. When it touches the wood, it flattens out into a highly specialized structure called a holdfast.
I really want to dig into the physics of this holdfast, because you were talking about a tiny, soft seedling trying to punch a hole through solid, armored tree bark.
It sounds impossible.
How does a seed with no roots generate enough leverage to push through solid wood?
Well, this is where the Viscin comes back into play. The biological glue isn't just to keep it from falling off the tree, it acts as an anchor point. Because the seed is cemented to the bark, the growing seedling has a rigid fulcrum.
Oh, wow.
As the holdfast presses against the bark, it utilizes cellular growth to act quite literally like a hydraulic press.
It's generating hydraulic pressure.
Exactly. It uses internal water pressure to push its specialized invasive tissue into the microscopic cracks of the bark. The initial tensile strength of that tiny seedling's grip is capable of withstanding pulling forces much, much higher than the seedling's own weight. It is locking itself in and forcing its way down with incredible force.
And it has to do this rapidly, because the entire goal of that holdfast is to physically break through the protective armor of the host's bark and reach the xylem and phloem, the internal plumbing of the tree.
The grand prize.
Once it breaches those pipes, the race against time is over. The mistletoe has established a permanent IV drip of the host's water and nutrients. The takeover is complete. It has successfully built its penthouse.
It really is a masterpiece of evolution. Every single mechanism we've talked about, from the time-release septate anthers to stealing carbon for larger fruits to the oxygen-activated Viscin, is a highly specific solution to the very specific problem of living in the canopy.
So what does this all mean? When we zoom out and look at the whole picture, the scope of it is just staggering. We're looking at a plant that started as a root-cutting thief in the dirt, hauled itself millions of years ago up into the highest branches of the Neotropical cloud forests, and completely rewrote the rules of survival.
It completely changed the game.
It physically reshaped the anatomy of the sword-billed hummingbird, stretching its beak to absurd, gravity-defying lengths just to ensure its pollen gets delivered. It drains the lifeblood out of ancient oaks and wild sweet gums just to build a bigger, fatter berry so a waxwing will fly a few miles further.
All for that extra distance.
It engineers its seeds to survive a bird's digestive tract, equips them with biological superglue, and programs them to hydraulically press their way into a new tree in a desperate race against time. It is a perfectly tuned, completely ruthless ecological loop.
But the precision of this system is also its greatest vulnerability. When an ecosystem is this tightly wound, it really doesn't take much to unravel it.
Which brings us to a final thought for you to take away from this dive. We've seen today how incredibly tightly this evolutionary knot is tied. The sword-billed hummingbird absolutely needs those deep, tubular mistletoe flowers to survive, because its beak is so extreme that feeding on regular, shallow flowers is incredibly difficult.
And the mistletoe absolutely needs that specific bird for pollination. They are locked together.
So what happens to this delicate balance if deforestation or climate change shifts the rhythms of the cloud forest?
It's a very precarious situation. If the ambient temperature changes and the mistletoe shifts its flowering time by even just a few weeks, or if it's forced to migrate to higher, cooler altitudes where the hummingbirds don't live, the synchronization breaks.
It's terrifying to think about.
What happens to the bird whose body is so extreme, so specialized, that it can't easily pivot to a new food source?
When nature's lock and key mechanisms are this perfectly matched, the breaking of a single microscopic pin can shatter the entire ecosystem. It's something for you to mull over. So the next time you see a polite, quaint little sprig of holiday mistletoe tied with a red ribbon, we hope you look up at it with a whole new level of respect. And maybe just a little bit of fear.
It has certainly earned it.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep exploring, and we will see you next time.